It's just going to be a recording. All right. So there's a whole host of issues that I wanted to discuss in terms of finding libertarian solutions for local, state, county, and federal issues, all that put together. That's what to sum up what the Libertarian Party is about and libertarian solutions for the issues that are facing the local, state, county, and national levels. And I think to sum it up, the federal issues would include immigration, taxes, and the drug war and police reform. So, I think we're going to start out with the local, state, and county issues, just because then that way, and kind of, I'll try to wing it out if possible.
Okay.
Well, I think I should probably discuss voting reform. Election reform first and foremost, because and I wanted to get your take on this because the federal government and in conjunction with local, state, and county governments, they have been consistently trying to get libertarians off the ballot in multiple areas throughout the country. And there are a number of solutions like ranked choice voting and so on and so forth that libertarians can utilize going forward. It just feels like, with regards to Democrats and Republicans, they get automatic ballot access and all this free media coverage, and most of their money goes on ads every time it's election season. And yet we have to struggle in getting petitions to get on the ballot, collecting signatures. And so what's your take on that?
Sure. Well, I think there's a couple of ways to look at it. One way is that we need to figure out a way to change the election laws. For instance, here in Nebraska, when I was in the legislature, I passed a bill which would give automatic ballot access to any third party that has at least 10,000 people registered to vote within the party. So we register people by party in Nebraska. And so there are ways of changing the election laws enough to make it possible to, for libertarians and others to get, permanent ballot access in some states. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily easier, for them to get elected. And so one of the things that you mentioned is the question of alternative voting methods, whether it's ranked choice or approval voting or, whatever. There are several different opportunities. We probably need to be pushing that as well. And one way to push that is through, it's probably not going to go through legislatures at this point because we don't have enough people in legislatures to promote it. But one way to change the voting system is through initiative efforts in some states. So if the Libertarian Party, where are you at, in Virginia?
No, actually, I'm in New York State.
Okay, New York. So that's even worse, huh?
Mm-hmm.
But if you're in a state that allows for initiative efforts, get your libertarian friends out to collect, to create a petition effort and try to create some ranked choice voting. New York City just recently did their mayoral election, right, through a ranked choice voting process.
Yeah, and I think that's for the primaries in the city. And as far as the rest of the state of New York is concerned, we don't quite yet have ranked choice voting,
right,
or whatever it is that it's referred to as. So when we go out and vote, we have closed primaries. So as you know, libertarians, we don't qualify for primaries until we get major party status. Now, as you know, the situation here in New York was they changed the rules on us at the last possible minute. So we had just barely garnered a major party status here in New York back in 2018, back when Larry Sharpe was running for governor and he met the threshold, whatnot. And then they initially created some commission under the Cuomo, administration to push for these initiatives that would have make it harder for third parties to get back on the ballot and stay on the ballot or whatnot. And they made it for every 2 years, so now we have to get X amount of signatures for a presidential cycle and X amount for a governor cycle. And we didn't quite pull it off for the Joe Jorgensen campaign, so we got kicked off the ballot. And I believe the LPNY is suing to get us back on the ballot, because technically it should be for either or, right? And so if but they kind of have it in for third parties, most particularly because when Cuomo was governor, and I'm sure you've heard the news that he's resigning.
Right.
But when he was governor, he stated that he wanted to, because of the family's working party or whatever party that's referred to as, make it harder for them to get ballot access. And it's surprising because they still were able to make it on the ballot because all they had to do was endorse Biden, and they made it on the ballot. And then here we are, we're the ones that, lost out on it. But we got a lawsuit, and hopefully we'll gain major party status and, get all that corrected in the near future. But this is what we're up against.
You all in New York have fusion voting, right? So,
yes, we do.
So it's possible for somebody to run on multiple ballot lines, and we don't have that in Nebraska. So,
well, yes. So there is fusion voting, and the Libertarian Party still has to authorize to the LPNY whether a particular Democrat or Republican should run on the Libertarian Party line. And if we have someone running, oftentimes there would be a primary if we're eligible for that. Right now, we're not eligible to run our own primaries because, we don't, first off, we have closed primaries. And then if you're an independent third party, such as us, then that doesn't count.
This is where it gets really tough, though, to try to make any sort of universal statements about ballot access, about vote choice, about because every state has their own little quirks and individual elements in the law, and so it's really tough for us to say that this should be the primary focus of the national party. Because the national party's time would be wasted in Nebraska, because we already have we have primaries, libertarian primaries in Nebraska. We have full ballot access, but someplace else, New York or elsewhere, then it makes sense to spend that time, and resources. So it's tough. It's depending on what the laws in your state are. You really have to think carefully about what the best approach is. And I don't think that we as libertarians necessarily want to go down the path of saying that there should be some sort of a national standard for elections, right? Because who's going to make the national standard? It's going to be Congress.
Right. But the thing is, we don't have any libertarians as of now in Congress. We did have Justin Amash, but he was a Republican. He switched over to the Libertarian Party, and then he decided not to run. So with him out of the way, there's basically no libertarians. Which is why we don't want to have any, but which is why we don't want national initiatives, because we have no one standing in the way of some of these bad things, of bad things happening, or promoting the good things. Right. And I always tell people, as a former state legislator, that if you really want to make a difference, it doesn't take a majority. It takes one or two. If we had one or two libertarians in every legislative body in the country, the changes that would happen would be amazing. Because people will, because for instance, when I changed parties in 2016,
all of a sudden, my Republican friends, I was a Republican before that, my Republican friends said, hey, we knew that's what you were all the time anyhow. So they didn't care. They still work with me on the things that we always work with. But my Democrat friends in the legislature, thought that I was someone that they could come to and talk to about issues. And, they would make a play for my vote as well. So, and it put me in a position where I could negotiate with both sides as an honest broker. So it doesn't take a majority of libertarians in a legislature in order to make a difference. It takes one or two who are willing to actually make a difference. And, you see Marshall Byrd out in Wyoming, who was elected as a libertarian, who's making a real difference out there. He was he was asked to co-sponsor something like 25 bills this year. Representative named Andrews up in Maine made the switch right after the election last year, and I've seen stuff from him that suggests that he's making a difference. So I think that we need to start focusing on winnable races at the legislative level for sure, and see if we can't make some differences that way.
Right. I think that's the first step. And I wanted to touch base on this because there are a multitude of issues for the Libertarian Party to focus on within their respective areas. And I think we've made tremendous progress in electing libertarians at the local, state, and county levels throughout the country. So much so that now we're under fire by some of the supporters of the Republican Party. There's even a sheriff candidate running on behalf of the Libertarian Party out in Erie County, who's running on behalf of the Libertarian, as you know, but I don't know if you know that. And the Republicans, some of their supporters are criticizing him, or whoever this person is. They're saying that, and this is a common theme, that every time we get more support and more votes, the supporters of the two major parties like to go ahead and say, well, you're going to split the vote. You're going to decipher the votes from the Democrats and the Republicans are going to win. Or you're going to split the votes from the Democrats, or the Democrats and the Republicans are going to win. So you always hear that argument, and it's heavily reverberated in the media, and you constantly hear it by its supporters of the two major parties. I know we've made so much progress, but every time we make all this progress, there seems to be a wrench that's thrown in the mix. And then what would you say to those people? And I know we're not going to get every single one of those people on board, but if you could get a few of them on board and to speak to the general audience of those two major parties, what exactly would you say to them?
Well, sure. For one thing, let me just say that when the two major parties start attacking the Libertarian, that means they're worried about us, and that means that we're doing something right. Okay, that's the nature of politics. Once they worry about you, then they come after you. And I could show you I could show you a whole stack of mailers that were sent out against me in 2018 when I ran for re-election, criticizing me for being a libertarian. That said, local candidates are the best positioned to talk to folks in libertarian world, right? We're the best positioned to go and knock on doors and talk to the voter. But what we have to do, and this is for school board, city council, county commission, all your local races, we need to quit spouting the libertarian line, if you will, and telling people, well, I want to cut this. We want to privatize education, and we want to get rid of public schools, and we want to, we want to have all roads be private roads. That's not the world we live in.
Right.
And the best thing that libertarians can do is, in my opinion, is say, I want smaller, less intrusive government. I want to put more power in your hands. Tell me what you're concerned about. And that's the thing that we tend not to do. We tend not to ask people what they're concerned about, what's important to them in this race. And until we learn how to have a conversation with people and actually listen to them and then try to reflect back with libertarian solutions to their problems, to their issues, then we're going to have trouble. So for instance, let's say if you're in a small town, you want to be on the city council, and you go to a door, and over again, you keep hearing about a problem with the local park. Okay, the local park is in disrepair. The swing sets are breaking. You know, that's dangerous. You know, people are, you know, riffraff is smoking and you know, doing drugs in the park or whatever. Okay, the answer doesn't have to be, you know, people want you to do something about that if you're going to be on the city council. So the answer doesn't have to be, we're going to set up guards, we're going to close, you know, I mean, it doesn't have to be a big state thing. It can be well, let's see if we can find, you know, let's see if we can find some organizations to volunteer to clean it up. You know, some local citizens can hang out there and just kind of dissuade the bad element from hanging out there. I mean, you know, maybe you get a local Rotary Club or something like that who will come and help fix the equipment. I mean, it doesn't have to be big money spent, you know, by the local government. It doesn't have to, you know, it takes somebody who's willing to provide more libertarian solutions.
Right. But I think part of the issue is getting libertarians elected. And as I've mentioned before, we've made tremendous progress getting libertarians elected throughout the local, state, and county governments. Well, local, state, and county governments throughout the country. And that's very good advice for libertarians that are in local, state, and county governments in those positions throughout the country. But that brings me to another point, and that is local taxes. There's school board taxes, property taxes, and just taxes in general. And I feel like we, you know, if we're going to focus, I mean, since we're starting at the local level, that's probably what we should start out with, is fixing you know, finding out what our respective local ordinances are in taxes, what our state laws and constitutions allow within the state that we're in, that the local government is set up in. And then, you know, trying to see what we can do going on from there. But then
for sure. Sure. Let me just say this. For sure, no matter what you're running for, okay, you need to know the rules that exist already. So in Nebraska, you need to understand, for instance, that on a local school board, most of the funds from a local school board come from local property taxes, and a little bit of it comes from the state. Okay, so if people are complaining about property taxes, which they do all the time, right? If they're complaining about property taxes, then you have to say, okay, how would you suggest that we pay for the local schools? You know, I mean, this is where we have to be willing as libertarians, I think, to engage in a back and forth and actually try to find out where people stand today. You know, because most people don't want to get rid of their local school boards, their local school districts tomorrow. You know, they kind of like their local public schools. And so, you know, while we may wish for something else, we need to figure out how best to, you know, raise the funds and to fund it in an efficient way so that it causes the least amount of pain possible while we are, you know, offering other alternatives.
Right, and those other alternatives could be things like private schools. It could be things like, all right, funding the public schools through private contributions and private charities, which I'm all in favor for, even with regards to Social Security. Hey, let's fund Social Security with private contributions, right? We can do the same with the public schools if that is going to be supported in that local area. I mean, you know, and, you know, maybe they have a better idea of how to fund it, and that's worth taking into account. But I feel a lot of people, when it comes to school board issues, they'll say, oh, our property taxes are too high, our school taxes are too high, but at the same time, oh, we want our public schools and we want it funded through property taxes. And it's just finding the middle ground and explaining to them, look, funding it in this mechanism is going to force you to pay taxes, whether it be school taxes on such and such property,
Right.
for the schools. And the issue that some people may have is if they don't pay the school taxes and they own the property, then it gets foreclosed on them. So that's where
Yeah.
the issue lies. And even if and it's like, it can be a challenge, but I mean, how does a libertarian navigate that field and still be able to maintain his or her political views with the Libertarian Party? Like, how do you do something like that with a libertarian solution?
That's a really good question, and I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I think you do the best you can once you get elected, or when you're running for office, you do the best you can. But I think you have to be. I'm a directional libertarian. I'm not an idealist libertarian. I believe that we need to move in a direction towards more liberty, but that we're not there yet, and we're not going to be there in my lifetime, probably. And so what we need to do is we need to be pointed in the right direction, and we can't expect perfection tomorrow. And
Right.
so what we do is we talk about ways that we can decrease the scope of government, decrease taxes, and on, without doing major harm to, and eventually, you chip away at it a little bit at a time. And I mean, think about how we got to where we are today. Okay, in this, we are in a moving towards bigger and bigger government. Both Republicans and Democrats are taking us down that path in the wrong direction. So if we want to change that, we need to figure out how to. First of all, we need to figure out how to stop the slide. Okay, and you can't stop the slide by saying. By saying, well, but we want no taxes and we want to privatize everything, because that's not where we are. You have to know where we are today. And then what we do is once you stop the slide, you turn around and you point in the right direction. And both the Republicans and the Democrats have taken us in this, increasing statist system over the course of the last 100 years. 200 years even, but certainly the last 100 years, we can say that we have moved more and more towards a bigger and bigger government. And they did it a little bit at a time. They didn't try to go for broke, and do it all in one fell swoop. They moved a little bit, and then somebody else came along in the next generation and moved a little bit further. And so we're going to have to be willing to do some of that. We can keep talking about the ideal, or at least some people can. But those who are running for office and who get elected to office, aren't always going to be able to accomplish the ideal. In fact, they'll almost never be able to accomplish the ideal. And so what we need to be able to do is to cheer them on as they are making steps along the way.
Right. I think that would be the better way to do it. But then, it's like, there's the anarcho-capitalist side of things, and I'm not on that extreme because, I tend to be a pragmatist myself, pragmatist / idealistic, minarchist, libertarian at that, but pragmatist in the way to do it. And of course, some people tend to be pragmatists but directional, which works either way. I mean, it helps, to have all these different varieties, because it keeps the party strong. But I don't think there's a local issue for everything. There's a local issue for everything that is affected at the local, state, and county levels that can be done at the local, state, and county levels, right?
Mhm.
But the issue of war tends to be a federal issue, as with immigration. And it can be a local issue too, right? But
Mhm.
it's mainly a federal issue, and we don't have libertarians elected at the federal level yet. But it would be nice, because immigrants bring so much to our communities, and that was another thing I wanted to talk about was immigration in the libertarian sense and allowing people to come here legally and being able to set up shop and have a better life for themselves, for their children, for their loved ones. And I think we're almost about out of time. But immigration tends to be a big issue, and the Republicans have shown that they'd much rather, get rid of every single immigrant under the guise of, oh my God, they're here illegally. And then the Democrats, all they can do is offer rhetoric and, you know, you know, and for any libertarian running at the federal level, I mean, because this is about promoting the Libertarian Party at all levels of government whenever possible.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that the immigration is one of the toughest things to deal with, and it's interesting because even though here in the middle of the country in Nebraska, we're a long ways from the border, but one of the questions that I got in 2018 when I was running for re-election is, well, what about immigration? It's like, well, I'm running for state legislature. I don't have anything to do with immigration. It's like when you ask somebody who's running for school board what they would do about abortion. It's like, well, nothing. It's
Right.
I think but people have these hot button issues, and you got to figure out what your answer is to it. Now, from a federal point of view, immigration is obviously a mess. It's just a mess because in an ideal world, well, and not all libertarians are going to agree with this, I guess. But I mean, many libertarians would say open borders, just let people come and go. And ideally, I think, yes, that makes a lot of sense, except that we have a system that the way we've set up our system in the United States with assorted entitlements because we've let government get big makes it much more of a political football to let people come and go. But I think that somebody running for federal office says, as a libertarian says, we need to look at how we allow people to come in to help us build our economy. If you have people who, right now we let people in who have STEM degrees, the science, technology, whatever it is, those kinds of degrees, but we don't let people come in legally, who in vast numbers anyhow, who are, less educated. Who are just, you're the tired, you're poor, you're hungry. I mean, you guys have your Statue of Liberty. Give me you're tired, you're hungry, you're poor, yearning to be free. And we tend not to let them in so easily, make it tough for folks to come here. And there's something wrong about that too, because they contribute to the economy and to their communities. So, if there's a libertarian out there running for federal office who's got a good answer for immigration, something that can be seen as palatable by either the Republicans or the Democrats or both, preferably, I'm anxious to hear it because I don't know what that answer is. It's tough because we know what the ideal is, but it's going to be tough to get to that.
Right. Because it seems like the federal government has grabbed onto so much power, and it's like, oh my gosh. And then, the only thing the local, state, and county governments can do is create add-ons and add-ons.
Mm-hmm.
These add-ons cause just as much of a problem in those local, state, county areas as the federal government itself. So the whole government structure is a mess, not just with immigration. I mean, immigration was one of the issues I wanted to touch base on as well. I mean, but this goes as far as police reform, you know, because there's so many people that complain, George Floyd and all these people. And I think Larry Sharp pointed out, we do need police reform. And he had some good ideas in terms of how to achieve that. And I think police reform and ending the drug war and allowing people to come here if they're going to contribute and so forth. I think all that plays a role, as well as promoting liberty, at least in that sense. And a lot of people look at police reform as, they all go hand in hand in my especially at the local, state, and county level, right? Because I can't imagine, you got some guy or girl and or whoever the person is, or family, whatever, they're contributing, they have a job, they created a business, or whatever the case may be, and then we're just going to deport them. And we're going to have these cops get aggressive with them, or these border patrol agents, and the local police are just going to turn them over. And, or if they see some other person who's not white, then they're going to pick on them or whatever. So they kind of go hand in hand. And I think ending the drug war and allowing people to come here, as long as they're not going to impose danger, force, or fraud to others, and then ending the drug war and coming about with police reform, I think some of the immigration thing could be achieved at the local level. But what about the police reform? And because I know there are various states who've legalized marijuana, and we do it one drug at a time, with same policy at the time, police reform, whatnot. I'm pretty sure you would agree with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one of the problems you got it with certainly behavioral issues, drug reform, legalizing drugs makes a whole lot of sense. Okay. Mm-hmm. Because it's a behavior. And as long as your behavior isn't harming someone else, it's none of my business,
Right. I agree with that.
And what's happened is that over the course of, this goes way back. It's interesting because, back in the 1890s and early 1900s here in my community, we're, our local congregational church is celebrating its 150th anniversary this year. And I was reading through some old stuff, back in the early 1900s and right after the church was founded. And there was a lot of talk about temperance movements, anti-alcohol movements. And, would somebody who was running for something be willing to shut down the bars? And so this is nothing new in American politics. It's always a matter of the people that, one of our attorney generals once said, the question is, do you imprison somebody? Do you imprison only the people that you're scared of, the violent criminals, or do you imprison, punish those that you're mad at because their behavior is something that you don't like? And I think that put it as well as anything, that to the extent that the state is going to punish someone, it ought to be it ought to be people who are actually harming others, that are posing a real threat to other people. And that if it's just a matter that we're mad at you because of your behavior, we ought to find other ways to address, we should find other ways to address addiction problems and things like that, because it does it does cause a problem for families and for communities and things like that. But it doesn't mean. Yeah, and for the individuals, but it doesn't mean that we should put them into prison. And so, there's a lot of these issues that are very complicated, and some of them can be handled best through changing statutes at the state level. Some require, but they also require the feds to stand back and say, okay, states, this is your thing. And for instance, the drug war is one of those areas where it's really problematic because the feds have declared certain things off limits, and the states are sort of required to follow along, or else they risk losing federal funding. I mean, it's the old golden rule. Those who have the gold make the rules, and if the feds are providing money for whatever, they will they can put conditions on it. So back in the 70s, during the Carter administration, that's when we had 55-mile-an-hour speed limits on the interstates, and that's when all of a sudden the drinking ages went from 18 in many places to 21 almost universally, and that's because the feds said, if you don't do that, you're not going to get your federal highway dollars. So, I mean, I think that there are so many different interconnected problems, and some of them, many of them, originate with something at the federal level that has kind of bled down or trickled down to the local school boards. When I was on the school board here in my community, the number of things, the amount of money that we had to spend, and the number of things that we had to do in order to stay consistent with federal requirements, so that we could get the money, get this extra money, was crazy. So, it's just a big extortion racket.
Right. And then most of the people on the school councils, I bet, would rather have the federal funding than increase school board taxes, because it tends to be either or.
Yeah,
so one way or the other, it's coming out of the taxes, because it's either coming out of the federal taxes or the school taxes.
Yes, except that the stuff that comes out of the federal comes out at the federal level because the feds borrow money. It's like free money. We don't actually, aside from when we file our tax returns on April 15th, most of us don't think twice about federal taxes, right? You just don't, it's either taken out of your paycheck before you even see it, or or you write a check once or twice a year but most of us don't think about that because we don't put together, because of the economies of scale, we don't put together, let's see, an increase in school funding or federal funding for school lunches has increased this much, and that means that my taxes are going to go up 3 cents this year. I mean, it's just a matter of scale. Whereas you actually see it with property taxes and things like that a lot more clearly, because
right.
your monthly bills go up more.
Right, and not only that, but then they give you mailers, like the school boards and whatnot, and they'll give you mailers that says, and they're actually more transparent than the federal government in many ways, because this is what we want. We want $300 for this, $400 for this, $35 for this, blah blah blah. It's always in the hundreds, and it amounts to $1,500 or $8,600 or something like that. And it varies depending on the school board, but they lay it out for you what they want, what you would expect to pay in the school taxes, and how everything goes up, and it's all on paper.
Right.
So then you can decide, do I want to pay for this or not, and then make that decision on whether to vote for it or not.
Right. Well, local government is where it's at. I mean, I'm a big believer that if you really want to make a difference in your taxes, if you really want to make a difference in make a libertarian world, you need to run locally. Even statewide is kind of a waste of time, but you can make a difference. You can make a difference locally. I mean, for instance, here in Nebraska, every community has its own rules. This is going to sound funny, but they have their own rules with respect to livestock inside the city limits. So chickens, pigs, whatever. And so it's funny because up in Lincoln, which is a fairly good sized city of about 300,000, you can have up to 5 laying hens no roosters, but you can have laying hens laying eggs for you in your yard.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But in Crete, Nebraska, where I live, population 7,000, you can't have any.
Oh, that's
And so I mean it's kind of a you know it's a crazy set of rules based on your local community. So if I was really eager to go have chickens in my yard, I'd run for city council and try to change that current that current ordinance so that we could have chickens. And,
right.
and I would be one of 6 people and on the city council, and I bet I could get 3 others to go along with it. And that's the thing that you need to remember, that if you're really looking for libertarian solutions, increasing the freedom of people, you can do it a whole lot easier locally than you can at the state level or at the national level.
Right. Even at the county level, you can do it more efficiently.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I mean, and so we're just about out of time almost. So before we end or wrap this up, do you have any other questions or any other type of responses you'd like to bring forth?
No, I mean, I think that let me just say that libertarians, libertarians come in all flavors, if you will. And what we need to understand is that we're all pushing in the same direction. We all want to go in the same direction. We may not have the same end point, but that's okay because we're so far away from even any intermediate points on the way to our end point that we can stay on the same train for a while and work together. And that's we need to. And I don't know if you've noticed any of this, but there's been some battles in the party lately. And
I've noticed that too.
And I just don't think we need to fight. I think that we need to. I think we need to. If we really care about liberty, it doesn't matter whether you're a pragmatist or a Mises or a radical or an audacious or an anarcho-capitalist or a minarchist or whatever. It doesn't matter. We all want to go in a direction that's fundamentally different from the direction we're going right now, and we can work together for a while anyway. And when we've turned the ship around, and when we're going in the direction towards more liberty, then we can start fighting with each other. But until then, it's counterproductive for us to fight as an organization. Within the organization,
I don't think it's ever going to be productive for us to fight.
Well, I think that's true, but it's especially not productive when what we're doing is we're preventing ourselves from making any real difference in the direction of liberty, and we're letting the Republicans and the Democrats take us further and further away from it. So we should try to work together for as long as we can, to take the country in another direction.
Right. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Because because I don't want to see us fighting any more than anybody else does. When I went to my first national convention, I think it was 2018, my introduction to that was, everybody, Nick Sauer, you're this, that, and the third, or this, that, and the other thing. And, or, this policy, and everybody proposing, and counter proposing for the bylaws and this and that. I didn't even know what we were voting on half the time.
I think conventions are a little bit different.
Right.
Because you do have all of the, kind of party faithful battling over individual positions and things like that. It's the constant fighting, in social media and, state by state by state, fighting about things. I just don't think it's a good thing for the party if the party actually wants to make a difference. We've got so many other things that we could be focusing on. And so, I hope that we will that we will take that to heart and, try to work together. I was at a meeting last weekend here in Nebraska. We did a training session for candidates and campaign managers. And, there were people who'd been in the party for 20 years or more. who, have seen it all. There were people there who have been in the party for 6 months and who I would say are probably part of this sort of new crowd that's come in. And then there were people like me who have always been sort of libertarian-ish, who finally made the switch during the Johnson campaign. And I have a little different, just because of the experiences I've got and so forth. I have a little bit different approach to things. It's less philosophical and more about how to get to where we want to go. And you know what? We all got along just fine. We had conversations, and we, when there was a risk that we were going to go down the path of fighting with each other, some of us just kind of said, okay, that's fine. Let's move on. Let's figure out how to win elections. Because winning elections, and people will disagree with me about this, but ultimately I think that winning elections is what a party's primary job is. Run candidates, win elections wherever you can, and try to affect policy that way. There are lots of other organizations that out there that, are think tanks or are, social clubs or whatever that can do some of these other things. And that's fine. They're all part of the movement. But a political party is supposed to, win elections. I'm kind of old fashioned in thinking that, I guess, but.
Right. No, but you're not alone, because if we're going to have a political party, I'd much rather win elections too. Yeah. And that's the wonderful thing about the Frontier Project is it allows for that. It said, okay, right. It looks at all the local, state, and county elections and figures out, okay, of them, which ones are winnable and which ones should we focus on. And that's how we're able to get the ball moving, And that's what every state party ought to be doing. Every state party ought to have its own frontier project, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that you run somebody for the legislature right away. If you're in a state like New York, that's probably a pretty tough lift. But your state parties can look around and say, okay, where are our best opportunities for winning some county board seats? Or where are our best opportunities for winning some city council races? Or where, and I don't know, not every state is like this, but in Nebraska, there are a ton of boards and commissions that are appointed either at the city level, the county level, or the state level. In many cases, they're governor appointments. And in Nebraska, for instance, I keep telling my libertarian friends that most of the boards, or many of them anyhow, say that no more than half of the members of the board can be of the same party as the governor. So in Nebraska, we have a Republican governor, and we will probably always have a Republican governor for the rest of my life, right? Because it's been 25 years since we've had a Democrat governor. Right. And so those kind of Democrats just aren't around anymore. So if we have a Republican governor, the Republican governor doesn't want to appoint Democrats, right? But if they have to, they will. But you know what? In Nebraska, libertarians are a legitimate choice. You can register as a libertarian in Nebraska. So why would a Republican governor not appoint a libertarian instead of appointing a Democrat? Because they've got that choice. So, I mean, in states where you've got if you've got laws like that, which have boards and commissions that the governor can appoint, if you've got a Democrat governor, why would they not want to appoint a libertarian over giving a Republican a seat at the table? And we need to take advantage of those kinds of things wherever we can. Right. But the thing about, I'm just going to say I agree with you. We should take advantage of it whenever we can. But the thing about getting libertarians appointed by Republican or Democratic governors at the state level is that, these type of boards and commissions, whenever things go downhill, first of all, you're subordinate to the governor, and the governor can remove you whenever he or she wants.
Sometimes depends on the state. Nebraska, it's not that way. They appoint you for 3-year terms or something like that, and
that's good.
Yeah. So I mean, it's it just depends. It depends on the state, but that's one of the things. You got to know the rules. You got to know the rules in your state, and I would just encourage everybody to leave no stone unturned. You know, keep looking for ways that you can advance the cause, that you can get experience, that you can build credibility, that you can show that libertarians can do things in some of these positions without being crazy. You know, I mean, the MO or the hit on libertarians, I think, too often is that somehow we're not very rational about, you know, we aren't based in reality. And so we have to show that we are based in reality, that when we have an opportunity to govern or to serve on these elected boards, that we really do care about doing a good job, that we really do care about, about governing efficiently, that we're not going to burn the place down, which I think some people are afraid of with us, that, you know, that there are anarchists in the midst who, as soon as they get on the school board, are going to, torch all the buildings. and that's not what we're going to do.
Right.
And so we have to get elected and appointed to positions where we can prove that, you know, libertarians can be responsible.
I think that makes sense. All right. Well, it's 8:20 and p.m. So thank you for joining me there, Laura. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Anytime.